The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered against the concrete floor of my garage. Through the thin walls, I could hear Cambria's voice drifting from the kitchen window, sharp and clear in the evening air. "Oh, Lila, you should have seen him today. Keaton was fixing that stupid truck again while I was closing the Morrison deal. $3 million, and he's out there with grease under his fingernails like some teenager." I froze, crouched beside my Ford's front wheel. The conversation continued, and I realized she was on speakerphone with her best friend. I mean, I love him, but honestly, how does it feel to watch me succeed while he does nothing? He used to box, you know. Now he just fixes things and pretends he's useful. Lila's laugh crackled through the phone. "Girl, you're carrying that whole household. At least your dad appreciates your talent at the company. Dad says I'm the best salesperson they've ever had." Meanwhile, Keaton acts like his little repair jobs matter. It's almost cute, in a pathetic way. I stayed perfectly still, my knuckles white around the wrench handle. 15 years of marriage, and this was what she really thought. The sweet sound of marital support, right up there with root canals and tax audits. "Don't be too hard on him," Lila said, though her tone suggested she didn't mean it. "Some men just aren't built for success." "You're right. I should be grateful he keeps the house maintained while I bring home the real money." The conversation shifted to weekend plans, but I'd heard enough. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on an old rag. The garage suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage had just crumbled in the space of a 5-minute phone call. That night at dinner, Cambria was all smiles and small talk. She asked about my day, complimented the pasta I'd made, and mentioned her big sale like it was no big deal. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard that conversation, I would have believed every word. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, twirling linguine around her fork. "Fixed the Morrison account," I said, watching her face carefully. She paused, just for a second. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just a joke. Fixed the truck's transmission. You closed the Morrison account." Her smile returned, but it looked different now. Practiced. "Right. $3 million. Dad was so proud." I bet he was. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way Cambria's gym bag was never in the same place twice. How she'd started wearing different perfume, something expensive and floral that definitely wasn't the vanilla scent I'd bought her for Christmas. The late nights at the office that had become routine rather than occasional. Our town was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. Henderson Falls had that Midwestern charm where neighbors watched each other's driveways and gossip traveled faster than news. Mrs. Patterson next door had been giving me sympathetic looks lately, the kind that suggested she knew something I didn't. "Keaton, dear," she said one morning as I collected the mail. "How are things?" "Fine, Mrs. Patterson. Why do you ask?" She glanced around nervously. "Oh, nothing specific. Just, well, Cambria's been working such long hours lately. I see her car leaving at all sorts of times." The way she said it made my stomach clench. She's dedicated to her job. Of course, dear. Of course. But the seed was planted. That evening, I suggested we grab dinner at O'Malley's, the local bar where half the town gathered on weeknights. Cambria declined, claiming she had reports to finish. "Maybe this weekend?" she said, not looking up from her laptop. "Sure, this weekend." I went alone, sliding into my usual spot at the end of the bar. Rico was there, my old boxing buddy who still trained at Murphy's gym downtown. He took one look at my face and ordered me a whiskey. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," he said. "Worse, someone might have stolen my wife." Rico raised an eyebrow. "Want to talk about it?" I told him about the phone conversation, the late nights, the strange behavior. Rico listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. "You need proof," he said finally. "Suspicion isn't enough. You need to know for sure." How do I get proof without looking like a crazy husband? Easy. Pay attention. Document everything. And maybe check her devices if you get the chance. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Cambria left her work tablet on the kitchen counter while she showered, something she never did. Usually, that thing was attached to her hand, like a medical device. My heart pounded as I picked it up. The screen was still unlocked, showing her email inbox. I scrolled quickly, looking for anything unusual. Most of it was standard business correspondence, client communications, internal company messages. Then I saw it. A calendar invite for private sales training with Blake Rayner, one of her colleagues. The invite was for last Tuesday at 7 p.m., location listed as Blake's apartment. The same Tuesday, she'd told me she was working late on the Morrison proposal. I scrolled further back. More calendar entries. Strategy session with Blake. Client dinner with Blake. Weekend sales workshop with Blake. My hands shook as I opened her messages. The thread with Blake started professionally enough, but as I scrolled down, the tone changed. Became friendlier, more personal, then intimate. Can't wait to see you tonight. Keaton thinks I'm at the office. Your husband doesn't deserve you. You're incredible. I know. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd never settled. I took screenshots with my own phone, my finger trembling on the screen. The shower was still running upstairs, but I knew I didn't have much time. I scrolled through more messages, finding explicit conversations about their relationship, complaints about me, and detailed plans for their meetings. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how casual it all seemed, how easily she lied to me, how little guilt she appeared to feel. In her messages, I wasn't even a real person. I was just an obstacle, an inconvenience she had to work around. I closed the tablet and set it back exactly where I'd found it, then walked outside to my garage, the same garage where this whole nightmare had started just a week earlier. I sat on an overturned crate and stared at my hands, trying to process what I'd just learned. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, and she was throwing it away for Blake Rayner, a guy who spent more on hair gel than most people spent on groceries. A guy who drove a leased BMW and wore suits that cost more than my truck. But as I sat there in the dim light of my garage, surrounded by tools and spare parts and the honest smell of motor oil, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it, something else was growing, something colder and more calculating. If Cambria wanted to play games, I'd play games. But I'd play by my own rules. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened. Have a good day, honey. I might be late again tonight. Big presentation tomorrow. Another presentation? You know how it is. Dad's really pushing the team to exceed quarterly targets. I nodded and smiled. I know exactly how it is. After she left, I made some phone calls. First to my lawyer, then to my accountant, then to a private investigator Rico had recommended. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right, completely and thoroughly. Because Cambria was about to learn something about her useless husband, something that would change everything. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy and deception. Cambria continued her routine of fake affection and fabricated work stories, while I played the role of the oblivious husband. But underneath the surface, I was gathering information like a man preparing for war. The private investigator, a former cop named Danny Walsh, was worth every penny. Within 48 hours, he had photographs of Cambria and Blake entering his apartment building together, leaving restaurants hand in hand, and sharing what could only be described as intimate moments in his car. Your wife's not being particularly careful, Danny told me during our meeting at a diner across town. Either she doesn't think you're paying attention, or she doesn't care if you find out. Probably both, I said, studying the photographs. Seeing the evidence in black and white somehow made it more real and less devastating at the same time. How long do you think this has been going on? Based on what I've observed and the credit card records you provided, I'd say at least 6 months. Maybe longer. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deception, of coming home to kiss me hello after spending the afternoon with another man. The scope of the betrayal was almost impressive in its thoroughness. "There's something else," Danny said, pulling out another folder. "I did some digging into Blake Rayner's background. Guy's got some interesting financial problems. Owes about $60,000 in credit card debt, behind on his car payments, and his apartment rent is 3 months overdue. So he's broke. Worse than broke. He's desperate. Makes me wonder if his interest in your wife is purely romantic." That was an angle I hadn't considered. Cambria made good money at her father's company, and she had access to family wealth that Blake could only dream of. Maybe this wasn't just about attraction. Maybe it was about opportunity. I spent the afternoon at Murphy's gym, working out my frustration on the heavy bag. Rico spotted me between his own training sessions, offering advice and moral support. "You're looking better," he said as I unwrapped my hands. "More focused. I'm getting clarity." "Good. Anger without direction is just noise. Anger with purpose, that's power." Rico had been a professional boxer before a knee injury ended his career. Now he trained other fighters and worked construction, but he still had the mindset of someone who understood strategy and patience. "What's your plan?" he asked. "Still working on it. But I want it to be public. I want everyone to see who she really is." "Be careful, man. Revenge can eat you alive if you're not careful." "I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for justice." That evening, Cambria announced she'd be working late again. Another presentation, another client dinner, another fabricated reason to spend time with Blake. I nodded and wished her luck, then settled in to watch a boxing match on television. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your wife is at Rossetti's with her boyfriend. Thought you should know. A friend." Rossetti's was an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place Cambria and I used to go for anniversaries. Now she was taking Blake there, probably using the company credit card to pay for it. I could have driven down there, confronted them in public, made a scene. The old me might have done exactly that. But the old me was gone, replaced by someone more patient and calculating. Instead, I drove to Blake's apartment building and waited. Sure enough, around midnight, Cambria's car pulled into the parking lot. She got out, straightened her dress, and walked confidently toward the entrance like she belonged there. I took photographs with my phone, adding to the growing collection of evidence. Then I went home and waited. She slipped into bed around 2 a.m., thinking I was asleep. She smelled like expensive wine and Blake's cologne, a combination that made my stomach turn. "How was work?" I asked quietly. She jumped slightly. "Oh, you're awake. It was fine. Long presentation, but I think we landed the account." "That's great, honey. I'm proud of you." "Thanks. Go back to sleep." But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, and planned my next move. The opportunity came 3 days later. Cambria's father, Wesley Hargrove, was hosting a company dinner at the Riverside Steakhouse, one of those glass and chrome establishments that catered to corporate types. It was supposed to be a celebration of quarterly sales figures, with the entire sales team and their spouses invited. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," Cambria said as she got ready. "I know these things bore you." "Actually, I'd love to come. It's been a while since I've seen your father." She looked surprised but pleased. "Really? Okay, great. Just maybe wear the blue suit, the one that actually fits." Another little dig, delivered with a smile. I was starting to collect them like souvenirs. The restaurant was exactly what I'd expected. All glass and steel, with ambient lighting and servers who spoke in hushed tones. Wesley Hargrove held court at a large table near the windows, surrounded by his sales team and their various partners. Blake was there, of course, looking perfectly groomed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He shook my hand with just a little too much firmness, the kind of gesture that was supposed to establish dominance. "Keaton, good to see you again," he said. "How's the, repair business?" "Can't complain. People always need things fixed." Wesley Hargrove commanded attention, like a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair, and the kind of confidence that came from inherited wealth and unquestioned authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his wine glass, "tonight we celebrate another record-breaking quarter, led by our top performer, my daughter Cambria." Applause rippled around the table. Cambria beamed, accepting congratulations from her colleagues. Blake caught her eye and winked, a gesture so obvious that I wondered how no one else noticed it. "Cambria," Wesley continued, "has single-handedly brought in over $12 million in new business this quarter. She's proven that dedication and intelligence can overcome any obstacle." More applause. Cambria stood slightly, acknowledging the praise with practiced humility. "Of course," Wesley said, his tone shifting slightly. "Success requires sacrifice. It requires putting the company first, even when that means making difficult choices." He looked directly at me as he said this, and I realized the speech wasn't just about celebrating Cambria's success. It was about establishing hierarchy, about making sure everyone knew their place. "Some people understand that sacrifice," Wesley continued. "Others are content to maintain the status quo." The table grew quiet. A few people glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Cambria's face flushed slightly, but she didn't object to her father's words. "Dad," she said softly, but he held up a hand. "I'm just saying that in business, as in life, there are leaders and there are followers. There are people who build empires and people who fix trucks." The silence that followed was deafening. Blake smirked into his wine glass. Several other team members studied their plates intently, and Cambria sat there, allowing her father to humiliate me in front of a room full of people. This was my moment, the perfect opportunity to reveal what I knew, to expose their hypocrisy and lies in the most public way possible. But something held me back. Some instinct that told me the timing wasn't quite right. Instead, I smiled and raised my own glass. "You're absolutely right, Wesley. Some people build empires. Others just own them." The comment landed strangely, not quite making sense to anyone at the table. Wesley frowned, unsure whether I'd just agreed with him or challenged him. "What do you mean?" Cambria asked. "Nothing important. Just agreeing with your father about the importance of understanding one's position." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I could feel Blake watching me with new interest. There had been something in my tone, something that suggested I knew more than I was letting on. After dinner, as we walked to our cars, Cambria was unusually quiet. "What was that about?" she asked finally. "What was what about?" "That comment to my father, about owning empires. Just making conversation. Your dad likes to talk about business, so I talked about business." She studied my face in the parking lot light, trying to read something there. "Sometimes I don't understand you. Sometimes I don't understand myself." That night, I made a decision. The public humiliation, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of respect, it all crystallized into something clear and actionable. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and exactly when I was going to do it. I just needed to wait for the right moment. The right moment came sooner than expected. Wesley Hargrove decided to host another company dinner just 2 weeks later, this time to celebrate landing a major municipal contract. The venue was the same steakhouse, the guest list nearly identical, and the atmosphere just as self-congratulatory as before. But this time, I came prepared. The leather portfolio I carried looked innocuous enough, just a simple document holder that could contain anything from insurance papers to repair estimates. No one paid it any attention as I took my seat at the table, positioned perfectly between Cambria and her father. "Keaton," Wesley said as we settled in, I have to admit, I was surprised when Cambria said you wanted to come tonight. These business dinners aren't usually your thing. I'm trying to take more interest in Cambria's career, I replied. She's accomplished so much. I want to understand her world better. Blake, seated across from us, raised his wine glass. To understanding, he said with a smirk that made my jaw clench. The dinner proceeded much like the previous one. Wesley dominated the conversation with stories of business conquests and market victories. Cambria basked in praise for her sales performance. Blake contributed just enough to remind everyone of his presence without overshadowing the family dynamic. You know, Wesley said as the main course arrived, I've been thinking about succession planning lately, about who might be ready to take on more responsibility in the company. Cambria's eyes lit up. Really, Dad? Well, you've certainly proven yourself. But leadership requires more than just sales ability. It requires judgment, the ability to make difficult decisions. He looked at me again with that same dismissive expression from the previous dinner. It requires surrounding yourself with people who understand ambition, people who share your vision for success. This time, Cambria didn't even attempt to deflect her father's obvious criticism of me. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the wisdom of his words. Speaking of difficult decisions, Blake said, leaning forward slightly, how does it feel to watch Cambria succeed while you do nothing productive, Keaton? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several people at the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Cambria looked down at her plate, neither defending me nor stopping Blake's attack. I mean, Blake continued, emboldened by the silence, she's out there closing million-dollar deals while you're, what, fixing transmissions? A few people chuckled nervously. Wesley's expression suggested he approved of Blake's directness, even if the timing was awkward. Don't be mad, Cambria said finally, looking up with a forced smile. Blake's just teasing. Teasing, I repeated, tasting the word. Right. Come on, Keaton, Blake pressed. Don't you ever feel inadequate watching your wife succeed at this level while you're stuck in your garage? More uncomfortable laughter. The entire table was watching now, waiting to see how I'd respond to this public humiliation. Wesley leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. I smiled and reached for my portfolio. Teasing is fun, Blake. Want to hear mine? I opened the leather folder and pulled out the company tablet I'd requested to borrow earlier, claiming I wanted to look at some of Cambria's presentations. Instead, I'd loaded it with something much more interesting. I was looking at the quarterly reports earlier, I said conversationally, powering up the device. Really fascinating stuff. The organizational structure, the financial breakdowns, the shareholder registry. Wesley frowned. Shareholder registry? That's confidential company information. Not to shareholders, it isn't. I connected the tablet to the restaurant's presentation screen, a feature they used for corporate events. The large display flickered to life, showing a detailed breakdown of company ownership. This is interesting, I continued, scrolling through the documents. According to these records, Wesley, you own about 15% of Hargrove Industries. The board of directors collectively owns another 8%. Wesley's face was turning red. Keaton, this is highly inappropriate. Turn that off immediately. But here's the really fascinating part, I said, highlighting a specific section of the registry. There's this holding company called Meridian Holdings LLC that owns 77% of all outstanding shares. The table had gone completely silent. Cambria was staring at the screen with growing confusion and alarm. Now, who do you think owns Meridian Holdings? I asked the room rhetorically. Then I clicked to the next screen, which showed the holding company's registration documents. My name was listed as the sole owner and managing member. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Wesley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Blake's smirk had completely disappeared. Cambria was staring at the screen as if it might change if she looked hard enough. That's impossible, Wesley said finally. I would know if someone owned a controlling interest in my company. Your company? I asked mildly. According to these documents, it's my company. Has been for about 3 years now. I clicked to another screen showing the transaction history. I acquired the shares through a series of purchases from various investors who needed liquidity. All perfectly legal, all properly documented, all filed with the appropriate regulatory agencies. But how? Cambria whispered. Turns out those truck repairs and maintenance contracts were more profitable than anyone realized. Plus some smart investments, a few lucky breaks, and a lot of patience. I turned to face her directly. Remember when you signed your employment contract 3 years ago? The one with all those clauses about company policy and termination procedures? She nodded slowly, her face pale. Well, according to Section 12 of that contract, any employee can be terminated immediately for cause by a majority shareholder. No notice required, no severance package, no appeals process. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a printed document, placing it beside her plate like a dinner menu. Cambria Hargrove, you're terminated. Effective immediately. Wesley shot to his feet. You can't do this. This is my company. I built it from nothing. Actually, you built it from your father's money and connections. But that's beside the point. The point is that I now own it, and I'm exercising my right to remove employees who don't meet performance standards. What performance standards? Cambria demanded, finding her voice. I'm the top salesperson. Sales performance is only one metric. There's also integrity, loyalty, and judgment. You failed spectacularly in all 3 areas. I clicked to another screen on the tablet, showing a series of photographs. Cambria and Blake entering his apartment. Cambria and Blake at restaurants. Cambria and Blake in his car. These were taken over the past 2 weeks, I explained to the stunned table. Professional surveillance, completely legal. Turns out my wife has been conducting her own private business meetings with Blake here. Blake finally found his voice. You had us followed? That's insane. What's insane is conducting an affair with a married colleague while using company resources to fund your dates. Speaking of which, Blake, you're terminated too. I placed another document in front of him. Effective immediately. Security will escort you both out after dessert. You can't prove anything, Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. I don't need to prove anything. I'm not a court of law. I'm the owner of this company, and I'm exercising my right to fire employees who violate company policy. Wesley was still standing, his face now purple with rage. I'll fight this. I'll sue you for everything you have. With what money? According to the financial records, you've been drawing advances against your salary for the past 6 months. You're technically in debt to the company. I stood up and straightened my jacket. The same blue suit Cambria had suggested I wear because it actually fit. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a lovely evening. Cambria Blake, your access badges have been deactivated. Security will contact you about retrieving your personal items. I picked up my portfolio and headed toward the exit, leaving behind a table of shocked faces and stunned silence. Keaton, Cambria called after me. Wait, we need to talk about this. I paused at the restaurant entrance and looked back at her. She was standing now, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Talk about what? I asked. About how you've been lying to me for months? About how you've been using me as a joke in your conversations with Blake? About how you sat there and let your father humiliate me while you planned your next secret meeting with your boyfriend? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. And now everyone else thinks it too. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage and the shocked silence of the Hargrove Industries sales team. Behind me, I could hear raised voices and the scraping of chairs, but I didn't look back. The first phase of my plan was complete. The aftermath of the restaurant confrontation spread through Henderson Falls like wildfire. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, the public humiliation of the Hargrove family was front-page news. Literally. The Henderson Falls Tribune ran a story about local business ownership changes hands that managed to include most of the juicy details without actually saying anything actionable. Mrs. Patterson could barely contain her excitement when she cornered me at the mailbox the next morning. "Oh my goodness, Keaton. Is it true? Did you really fire Cambria at dinner last night?" "Just some business restructuring, Mrs. Patterson. Nothing too exciting. But everyone's saying you own the company now, and that Cambria was having an affair with that Blake fellow." I shrugged non-committally. People say a lot of things. But her eyes were bright with gossip-fueled energy. By noon, half the town would know every detail, and by evening, the story would have grown to epic proportions. Cambria hadn't come home the night before. I'd found a note on the kitchen counter saying she was staying at Lila's house and that we needed to figure this out like adults. The note's tone suggested she still thought this was a temporary setback rather than a complete life change. My phone had been ringing constantly since dawn. Reporters, company employees, business associates, and random acquaintances all wanted to know what was happening. I'd turned it off after the 15th call. Rico showed up around 10 a.m. with coffee and donuts, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Man, you should have seen Blake's face when he walked out of that restaurant. Looked like someone had stolen his puppy. "You were there? Are you kidding? After you told me what you were planning, I wouldn't have missed it for anything. Got a table across the room and watched the whole show." Rico settled into my kitchen chair, still chuckling. Wesley looked like he was about to have a heart attack. And Cambria, man, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Any regrets?" he asked after a moment. I considered the question seriously. None. They had it coming. "What's next?" Now things get interesting. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Tonight. Murphy's Gym. Come alone. B." Blake wanted a private conversation. That was either very brave or very stupid of him. "Looks like Blake wants to chat," I told Rico, showing him the message. "You going?" "Absolutely. Want to provide backup?" "Wouldn't miss it." Murphy's Gym occupied the bottom floor of an old brick building downtown. It smelled like sweat and leather and decades of hard work. The boxing ring dominated the center of the space, surrounded by heavy bags, speed bags, and weight equipment that had seen better days. Blake was waiting when I arrived at 8 p.m., pacing nervously near the ring. He'd traded his expensive suit for jeans and a polo shirt, but he still looked out of place among the gym's working-class atmosphere. Rico was already there, ostensibly working out, but positioned where he could intervene if necessary. A few other regulars were scattered around the gym, providing witnesses without being obvious about it. "Thanks for coming," Blake said as I approached. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "What do you want, Blake?" "I want to make a deal." "I'm listening." He glanced around nervously, then moved closer. "Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But this doesn't have to destroy everyone's lives. Doesn't it? Cambria loves you. She made a mistake, but she loves you. And I was just confused. The pressure at work, the competition, it made me do things I wouldn't normally do." I almost laughed. "You're blaming work pressure for sleeping with my wife?" "I'm saying people make mistakes when they're under stress. But we can fix this. We can all move past it. How do you propose we do that?" Blake's eyes lit up, thinking he'd found an opening. "You give us our jobs back, we end the affair, and everyone goes back to normal. Cambria will be grateful, Wesley will respect your authority, and I'll transfer to another department. And what do I get out of this generous offer? You get your wife back. You get your marriage back. Isn't that worth something?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had been sleeping with my wife while pretending to be my friend, who had humiliated me in public while secretly betraying me in private. "Blake," I said finally, "let me explain something to you." My marriage ended the moment Cambria decided to lie to me about working late so she could spend time with you. My respect for her ended when she sat there and let her father humiliate me while you smirked into your wine glass. And any possibility of reconciliation ended when she chose to protect you instead of defending me. His face fell. So that's it? You're just going to destroy everything out of spite? I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what was already broken. Blake's expression hardened. You think you've won, but you haven't. Wesley has connections you can't imagine. He'll make your life miserable. And Cambria, she'll never forgive you for this public humiliation. I'm not looking for forgiveness. Then what are you looking for? Justice. Blake shook his head and turned to leave, then stopped. You know what? Fine. Have it your way. But don't expect this to end here. Some fights don't stay in the ring. After he left, Rico walked over, unwrapping his hands from his workout. Guy's got some nerve, he said, offering to end the affair like he's doing you a favor. He's desperate. Desperate people make poor decisions. You think he'll try something? I think Blake is about to learn that some people fight back harder than expected. The next few days brought a parade of visitors to my door. Company employees wanting to know about their job security, business associates trying to understand the ownership change, and finally, inevitably, Cambria herself. She arrived on Thursday evening, looking tired and defeated. Her usual perfect appearance had been replaced by something more human: wrinkled clothes, minimal makeup, and an expression that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. Can we talk? She asked from the doorway. We're talking now. Inside, Keaton. Like civilized people. I stepped aside and let her enter. She walked through the house like she was seeing it for the first time, taking in details she'd previously ignored. I never realized how much work you put into this place, she said, running her hand along the kitchen counter I'd refinished the previous summer. You were busy with other things. She flinched at the comment but didn't respond directly. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Cambria. Anger is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely. Then what is it? Disappointment? Disgust? Relief? Relief? Relief that I finally know the truth. Relief that I don't have to pretend anymore. She was quiet for a moment, processing this. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I don't know. I thought maybe you'd never find out. Or if you did, we could work through it. Work through it? People have affairs, Keaton. It happens. But that doesn't mean the marriage has to end. I stared at her, amazed by the casual way she discussed betraying our vows. You really believe that, don't you? I believe that 15 years of marriage should count for something. I believe that one mistake shouldn't erase everything we've built together. One mistake? Cambria, you've been lying to me for months. You've been using our home as a base of operations for your affair. You've been letting your father and your boyfriend humiliate me while you sat there and smiled. Her composure finally cracked. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Nothing just happens. You made choices. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time you came home and kissed me hello after spending the afternoon with Blake, those were all choices. So what now? You destroy my career, humiliate my family, and throw away our marriage because I made some bad choices? I'm not throwing away our marriage. You already did that. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You want to be vindictive? You want to punish everyone because your feelings got hurt? Go ahead. But don't pretend this is about justice or principle. This is about your ego. Maybe it is, but at least I'm honest about it. She walked toward the door, then stopped. You know what the funny thing is? I actually did love you. Despite everything, I loved you. Past tense? Past tense. After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about 15 years of marriage and how quickly it could all fall apart. But I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The next morning brought news that would change everything again. Wesley Hargrove had hired a team of lawyers and was challenging the ownership transfer. According to the morning paper, he claimed the stock purchases had been made under false pretenses and that the company's board had never been properly notified. It was going to be a fight after all. I smiled as I read the article. Wesley was about to learn the same lesson his daughter had just learned. Some people fight back. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. in the Hargrove Industries conference room. Wesley had called it under some obscure corporate bylaw that allowed board members to challenge ownership transfers in cases of material misrepresentation. He was betting that his decades of business relationships and political connections would be enough to overturn my legal claim to the company. He was about to discover how wrong he could be. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying the same leather portfolio that had started this whole mess. The conference room was already buzzing with activity. Board members, lawyers, and what appeared to be a few reporters huddled in conversations around the large oak table. Wesley sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his expensive suit and confident posture suggesting he believed this meeting was just a formality. Cambria sat to his right, looking professional, but tired. Blake was notably absent, probably on the advice of his own lawyer. "Keaton," Wesley said as I entered, "thank you for coming. I think we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly and get back to business as usual." "I'm sure we can," I replied, taking a seat directly across from him. The meeting was called to order by the board secretary, a nervous-looking man named Peterson, who clearly wished he was anywhere else. Wesley's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Margaret Chen, immediately launched into a presentation about corporate governance and the legal requirements for ownership transfers. The board was never properly notified of these stock purchases, she argued, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Marin used a shell company to hide his identity and intentions, which constitutes material misrepresentation under Delaware corporate law. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes, citing case law and corporate precedents with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. When she finished, Wesley leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "I think that makes our position clear," he said. "This attempted takeover was conducted through deceptive means and should be invalidated immediately." Peterson looked at me nervously. "Mr. Marin, would you like to respond?" I opened my portfolio and pulled out a thick folder. "I would, thank you." I stood and walked to the presentation screen, connecting my laptop with the same casual confidence I'd shown at the restaurant. "Ms. Chen raises some interesting points about corporate governance," I began, but she's overlooking a few key facts. The first slide showed a timeline of my stock purchases, each one properly documented and filed with the appropriate regulatory agencies. Every share acquisition was conducted through legitimate market transactions. Meridian Holdings LLC was properly registered with the state of Delaware, and all required disclosure documents were filed within the legal time frame. Wesley frowned. "But you never disclosed your identity or intentions to the board." I wasn't required to. Under Delaware law, beneficial ownership disclosure is only required when someone acquires 5% or more of a company's stock with the intention of influencing corporate control. I clicked to the next slide, showing the legal definition of control intent. Each of my purchases was for less than 5% of outstanding shares, and each was documented as a passive investment. I never expressed any intention to influence corporate control until after I'd acquired a controlling interest. Ms. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That's a very narrow interpretation of the disclosure requirements." "It's the correct interpretation. But let's talk about material misrepresentation, since you brought it up." I clicked to a new slide showing financial records from the company's accounting system. These are expense reports filed by Cambria Hargrove over the past 6 months. Notice anything interesting? The room grew quiet as people studied the numbers. Cambria's face went pale. 17 dinners at upscale restaurants, all charged to the company as client entertainment. But according to the client contact logs, none of these dinners included actual clients. I clicked to the next slide, showing credit card receipts and calendar entries. Cross-referencing these charges with Blake Rayner's schedule shows that every single dinner was actually a personal date, paid for with company funds. Wesley's confident expression was starting to crack. That's a personnel matter, not a corporate governance issue. You're right. Let's talk about corporate governance. The next slide showed email records I'd obtained through my position as majority shareholder. These are internal communications between Blake Rayner and various company clients over the past year. Notice how many of these deals were actually initiated by other team members, but credited to Blake in the final reports. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. And these are communications between Cambria and her friend Lila Morrison, who works for our biggest competitor. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Cambria shot to her feet. That's a private conversation. You can't use that. Actually, I can. These emails were sent using company equipment, which makes them company property. And the content is very interesting. I read from the screen. Lila, the Morrison account is going to be huge. If your company could somehow get access to our proposal before the deadline, you'd know exactly how to underbid us. The silence that followed was deafening. Industrial espionage, I continued calmly, conducted by the company's top salesperson in collaboration with a competitor. That's not just material misrepresentation, it's corporate sabotage. Wesley was now visibly sweating. This is impossible. Cambria would never... There's more. I clicked through several more slides showing financial irregularities, falsified sales reports, and evidence of systematic fraud within the sales department. Blake Rayner has been inflating his sales numbers by counting the same deals multiple times across different reporting periods. Cambria has been using company resources for personal expenses and charging them as business costs. And Wesley, you've been drawing advances against future profits that don't actually exist. I turned to face the room directly. So when Ms. Chen talks about material misrepresentation, she's absolutely right. This company has been systematically misrepresenting its financial position, its sales performance, and its ethical standards for at least 2 years. Peterson was frantically taking notes. The reporters were typing on their phones, and Wesley looked like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. The question, I continued, is what we're going to do about it. I clicked to a final slide showing a proposed corporate restructuring plan. Effective immediately, Cambria Hargrove, Blake Rayner, and Wesley Hargrove are terminated for cause. Their company benefits are forfeited, their stock options are canceled, and they are banned from company property. Wesley finally found his voice. You can't do this. I built this company. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. You didn't build this company, Wesley. You inherited it from your father and ran it into the ground through nepotism and poor judgment. I'm not destroying it. I'm saving it. I packed up my materials and headed for the door. The board can vote to ratify these changes, or they can resign and be replaced by people who understand fiduciary responsibility. Either way, this meeting is over. As I reached the door, Cambria called out one last time, Keaton, please, don't end it like this. I turned back to look at her. This woman I'd been married to for 15 years, who had betrayed me so casually and completely. I'm not ending anything, Cambria. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore. I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the wreckage of the Hargrove family empire and the shocked silence of people who had underestimated the man they thought they knew. Outside in the parking lot, Rico was waiting by my truck, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. How'd it go? He asked. Better than expected. So what now? I looked back at the office building where I'd just dismantled everything Wesley Hargrove had thought was his legacy. Through the windows, I could see people arguing, gesturing wildly, trying to figure out what had just happened. Now I go back to my garage and fix some trucks. That's it? That's it. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see Cambria and Wesley walking toward their cars, their faces grim with the reality of their new situation. They had called me useless, unambitious, content to maintain the status quo while they built empires and closed million-dollar deals. They were right about one thing. I was content. Content to work with my hands, content to fix things that were broken, content to live honestly. The difference was, I'd never confused contentment with powerlessness. I drove away from Hargrove Industries for the last time, leaving behind 15 years of marriage and a lifetime of other people's expectations. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with calls from reporters, lawyers, and business associates who wanted to know what came next. I turned it off and drove home to my garage, where honest work and simple tools waited for a man who finally knew exactly who he was.